I think I'll put some water in the glasses and I'll get rid of the bottle for now because it's in the way of the camera.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, for example, it's very crucial. My son was at EPFM in Lausanne 8 years ago, and in his class in mechanical engineering, there was.
You want to stay and ask questions? We don't take questions. Okay, so we all set? I'm just going to test the sound. We are ready to start. Hello? We are ready to start. Hello? Hello, hello. Okay. So good morning. Good morning from the 15th European Space Conference in Brussels. We are connecting from the EU Space Corner with 4 industry insiders. We're going to discuss this morning the topic of skills. What is the situation with skills in the European space sector? Are there shortages? What are the needs? How is this evolving? And what needs to be done so that the industry is not handicapped in this global competition for talent? I'm very delighted to be joined here on stage by 4 speakers, which I will introduce. And I will start with Carla Filotico. She's partner at Space Tech Partners. Mr. Marc Tendrieux, chairman of ERSC, the European Association of Remote Sensing Companies, and also a CEO of Terranis. I have Mr. Eric Chithart from the University of Luxembourg, and Mrs. Renata Mele, Senior Vice President for Sustainability and Chief Technology and Innovation at Leonardo. So, we call this session Insider's View. And I will start my first question for Carla. I mean, for many years, Space Tech has done a lot of studies looking into different dimensions of the European space sector. Could you give us a bit the canvas of what is the situation in the space sector today? Is there skills shortage? And if it is, how is this affecting the industry? And what is the outlook, considering also some of the main technology trends in the sector?
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and pleasure being here today. So here I would like to put on screen a couple of results of a recent study we have conducted for the European Commission, STARS EU, under which, together with other companies and universities, we have mapped the current situation in terms of education and skills in Europe. So in a nutshell, while the slide is going to be coming on screen, basically what we are observing is that looking and starting from the university side, the European offering is quite large in terms of available and interesting curricula in support of the space industry, but is mainly focused on the hard skills, if you wish. So an engineering degree in Europe most of the time includes only STEM, meaning science, technology, engineering, and maths subjects, a bit less of arts. Of course, in US, the situation is a bit different with the Bachelor of Arts, in that case, which in the beginning is a broader, so it's including also aspects which are not necessarily related to technologies. But from that perspective, we have a very good breadth of possible curricula overall in Europe. Another important statistics in our analysis is that most of the degrees that then go to work in the space sector are mainly at bachelor and master in science, and 50% are PhD. The ones that go to the industry, of course, the ones that stay and work in the space sector in the research arena are more PhD by definition, because they stay and continue studying. Another important statistics, and I really would like to highlight this, because we are discussing this morning about the representation of women at leadership, but not only, overall in the space industry. And based on our survey, only 25% of the total employment in the space sector are actually women. So we were discussing with our colleagues here, is that depending, because from STEM, the graduation of women is less relevant, that the one coming from, of course, the male demographics. So that could be a correlation that we can easily make. Also considering that when we look at the SME compared, a small medium enterprise compared to a large industry, in that case there is a bit more balanced requirement in terms of both STEM and other skills. While in the bigger industry, when they require and hire new graduates, they mainly tend to hire degrees or students from STEM universities. So you see the correlation. If the STEM degrees are actually giving less women out of the graduation, so by conclusion, of course, also the industry is lacking women. The other consideration about this is that also where the career spend, and we have another slide in the report that potentially can be shared, at least in this panel, is that the tendency of women, and this is in general in the leadership, is when we look at the age distribution, is younger. So that means at a certain point, so women enter, but then exit the industry and do not proceed in the career progression. So meaning at the end of the day, less leaders or less C-level women in the industry. And then I will stop with the last point in regards to shortage that was asked indeed. So based on our survey, out of 100, let's say, jobs post in the industry, some from the industry about space employment, there is still a shortage. So meaning that not all these job postings are actually fulfilled. So that means that there is, a bit of a gap between the needs of the industry and the students or graduates then applying for these jobs. And I pause it here for the dialogue later, because I think that can spark some interesting discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. Some very interesting figures indeed. So we retained a lot. There is a skill shortage. Very often the skill set is not adapted to what the industry need is. So my next question will be for Professor Echechat. You are professor at the University of Luxembourg, but you also representing an alliance of 5 universities from 5 member states, which was created to develop some new ways of collaboration in the field of space. Luxembourg is also a very interesting example. We have very well-established companies like SES, but we also have a very vibrant new space scene. From the academic perspective, how do you see that this has impacted, or not at all, the evolution of the academic offer? And is there a need for some new or different skill sets in the sector, and how is the education system responding to this? If you can give us your perspective.
Yes, good morning and thank you for the invitation. Very pleased to be here. In a nutshell, within Université, which is effectively an alliance of 5 universities, we are focused on the space sector. And the first thing that we've done 2 years ago is to do a survey within 100+ companies just to understand what they need in terms of skill and competencies. So without being very long on these kind of figures, but there are a number of things which are coming out. The essentials of our question was the following. What would you be doing within 5 or 10 years in terms of hiring people? What would be your ideas of skill and competence that you would need within 10 years? So there were interesting releases out of this survey, and there are some buzzing words coming out, and which was quite surprising in view of a classical STEM curricula that we in Europe. For example, we have something which came first, was very surprising to me as an academic, was interpersonal skills and cooperation. If you explain this to an engineering school, it's very difficult to swallow. The second one was communication, and something which came up quite recently also, and it was not so much a surprise because if you consider new space, is the term finance. Now, if you look at space industry, most of the people we interviewed were looking at people who know finance. They must be engineers, they must be technical people, but they must also understand finance, which is a very drastic difference in terms of willingness and skill from the European industry in space for the next 5 or 10 years. Now, at the end of the day, when looking at a survey, we came to a conclusion that the academic programs must be flexible. And this question of flexibility will not be done without the help of the industry. You may know that professors in general have a large ego. They know everything. The older they get, the older they know, even if they're not within their specialty. So we need the help from the industry in this contract with sort of pushy messages also. If we do something bad, we must know in the academy that we do something bad. Because at the end of the day, we are producing the people for you, and you pay these people, and there is a sort of responsibility and liability in this context. Now, the one thing also which came out of this survey in terms of curriculum development is the following. Most of the industrials are looking at people which are trained as problem-based learning or problem-based solvers. They are not so much interested in theory anymore. They are not anymore interested in people having a large knowledge. They can still acquire it during their professional, which comes out to the discussion of lifelong learning. People don't come up with a final knowledge at the end of the study which will stay for the next 30 years. There must be some training all along, and university and engineering schools must take this into account. And the last point that I would like to follow is this one. The space industry has a cycle. If you look at the technology, the way things are developing and so on, it's almost a 15-year cycle on every subject. If you look at ESA, if you look at NASA on big program, it's a 15-year cycle, and most of the academic programs are slow in adapting. This means that when a group of professors decided to do something, it will take 10 years before something coming out. It's already out of the cycle from the space industry. So university and school, engineering school, must do something in this context. Last but not least, I would advocate also what we call blended learning. If you want to have people get more knowledge within the industry, they have to go through lifelong learning, not forcibly going out of Europe or very fast solutions. But blended learning, using the modern digitalization tools are extremely useful. You get super courses. Even within our consortium, we build up 16 interdisciplinary courses for industry in 1 year. It is possible, and it's giving an output also for the industry in this context. So forward-looking, I'm very confident if people are just talking together. This is absolutely key in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your very interesting perspective. So we not only need hardcore STEM skills, but we need a lot more soft skills. It was also coming out in your study. My next question will be for Mr. Dampieux. As a representative of industry, of course, you represent ERSC, but also a small company in the downstream value chain. How do you see this question of skills? Is industry exchanging enough with the academic and training institutions to deliver the skills of tomorrow? Are there maybe some best practices that you can share in bridging this gap? And what does this mean for a small company like Terranis that you also manage?
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Professor, for your kind words about the cooperation between industry and academy for tackling this problem. First of all, I would like to point out that ERSC is an association which gathers the companies, about 130 companies, but from the downstream sector, meaning not building satellites, but really using or operating these satellites, which means companies which are normally closer to the market and to the user needs. In total, the sector, the downstream sector, represents about 750 companies with 12,000 employees, and importantly, about 80% of them are working in SMEs. It's really a specificity of this sector. And every year we are also running a survey in the industry, And in the last one, we ask the questions about the difficulties to find the right people for the right places. And yes, typically I think that 77% of the companies answered that yes, they were facing difficulties to find the right skills. And more interestingly, we ask which kind of skills are most lacking. So the two first categories were dealing with software development and architects and data analytics, which is not surprising because it's something which we can see in almost all economic sectors. But most surprisingly, the third one was dealing with business-oriented and sales skills, which is more surprising because effectively we are more talking about soft competences and soft skills, which should not be so difficult to find if perhaps closer links are established between the industry and the academy in order to be sure that the business schools and university are also taking care a bit more about the specificity of the downstream Earth observation services, which is, I think, important because that's also a sector which is moving because first we are more and more moving from pure R&D towards more operational services closer to the user. So for that we need people who understand the end user needs and aspirations, and in order to be sure that the fit is good between solutions and needs. But also there is, as already said, the emergence of what is called the new space, which is making an appeal of different types of skills. It has been highlighted with respect to the finance skill, but also, yes, business oriented in order to prepare or consolidate the business plan in order to be sure that this new constellation will at the end find their market. With respect to the good experience, I would just mention an initiative, project, which is the EU4Geo Alliance, which is gathering about 25 partners in Europe, partners from academy, from industry sectors, and who are working on establishing or trying to set up what is called a long-term action plan, whereby the goal is precisely to try to find a better fit between the education world and the needs from industry. That's certainly something which must be extended and broadened, I would say, in order to be more efficient at the end in Europe. And the last point, and just to fully in agreement with what you said, Professor, we have to consider that the education and training is not a short-term feedback loop, or control loop, as we say in technical world. Takes time, so which means that we have to think not only on the short term, meaning the needs today, but we have to plan what will happen in 5, perhaps 10 years, in order to be sure that at the end the students we are training now are fitting the needs tomorrow. I think it's something here again that where close discussions between industry and academy is necessary.
Thank you very much for sharing this perspective from industry and also sharing your interesting experience with Earth and the EU4Geo initiative. My next question will be for Mrs. Renata Mele. You are Senior Vice President at Leonardo for Sustainability. Greening the industry is something very topical. We all talk about here in conferences. What do you think are the skills that are needed for the green transition of the space industry, or industry more generally? how do you see this from the perspective of a well-established company such as Leonardo? And what is Leonardo doing to make the aerospace and defense ecosystem more sustainable? And maybe to link this to the topic of our discussion, is this making the industry more attractive for new talent from your perspective?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you for the invitation. Very glad to be here. It's clear that the green transition and more generally the sustainability transition represent one of the most important topics in the agenda of institution, corporation, because we know that there is an urgency to go towards the green transition. And I would say that the geopolitical context in Europe particularly has made this urgency even more important, because energy and what is happening in the sector of energy is driving us towards a green transition more and more. And the space sector, the aerospace and defense sector, because I would say that this is a broader view that we need to have in this context. The aerospace and defense sector can have a real important role. First of all, we have to green ourselves, so improve our operations, our supply chain. So there is an ecosystem that has to be involved in the green transition. And we know that, and this is the same situation for other sectors in manufacturing. But we have an important tool more that we can be enabler of the green transition with our technological innovation, promoting new ideas and new solutions. Consider just the downstream space applications. So the combination of satellite data with advanced algorithms and all the application that can be developed in this field. So this is a world of application that can be an incredible impact in many industries for protecting territories, protecting, for understanding, monitoring, for predicting new events. So it's clear that our sector can be really important in this. So what are the skills that are most important to drive this process? We already talk a lot about, hard skills, scientific, technological background, digital skills, the twin transition that is something that has to be, fostered by this context to achieve the sustainability. And we know that. But there is also a part of the soft skill related to the critical thinking, analytical thinking, coping with uncertainties. And all these kind of skills that, by the way, have been recognized also by the World Economic Forum as top skills by 2025, represent some kind of skills of the future that we need to improve to push forward our comprehension of this sector and, of course, to drive the transformation. But I would say that we need something more. And at Leonardo, Leonardo is a company, aerospace and defense global company, active worldwide, so leading different technological fields. So we preside over strategic technologies. And for us, innovation is vital. But what is important is to drive and to address innovation in a direction that can be towards the solution of global problems. And this is vital also for the business, because sustainability is a key of competitiveness. So I think that we have to not only talk about skills, but also about mindset. We need a new sustainability mindset to develop skills to drive the green transition and the ecological transition. And in this sense, I think that the partnership with academia, research center, is really important. It's important to have a new generation of talent, of manager, that start to think to the business in a different way. Business as unusual, it was said in the past, but now it's becoming more and more usual, introducing sustainability concept in the managerial practices, because we need to cope with uncertainty at managerial level, but also to have a new generation of people, of workers, of managers that have in mind long-term evolution. And that's why it's so important, I think, to combine sustainability mindset together with the growth of skills for the future.
Thank you very much. So obviously there's so many different dimensions of this skills conversation. It's not something we can address in a 30-minute session. So I would like to thank you for your initial remarks, and to conclude our conversation, I would ask you one question, and if you can, in 1 minute, each of you, just tell us your perspective. How can all actors from industry, academia, and public institutions better cooperate with each other and come up with joint solutions, long-term solutions, to bring the skills gap in our space sector? Maybe we start with Carla.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is something that's already started eventually to initiate this dialogue where more and more, let's say, the supply and demand talk together. So supply meaning the people providing with training, meaning universities and training centers and etc., and of course the industry. And really having this continuous dialogue in terms of understanding how to evolve eventually the breadth of the skills trained and offered from university upwards. And I would like also to link to what Professor just said in terms of really considering the lifetime of a career in space and how indeed over time these extra skills can be filled, and also by the offering of a more accessible university and platform, and from that perspective. So,
thank you. So, Mark.
Nothing. Sorry, I cannot agree anymore. Perhaps the only thing I can add is the possibility of using perhaps more some tools like having some thesis. Students making their PhD in cooperation between industry and university. That's something which is already happening, but can be developed a bit more, because that's also a way of maintaining the dialogue between the academy and the academic world and the industry.
Thank you. And Professor Gilgard?
To be really honest, I like the supply and demand paradigm. We have actually in universities and schools, even if it's very unpolitical to say it, we have two clients, two class of clients. We have students and we have the industry. We are just intermediate between the supply and the demand. This means that if we consider that space is changing, we are going from a publicly funded space to a privately funded spaces with new entrants. Schools and university has to adapt and to discuss with the clients. This means the students to some extent, but also with the industry. If we don't discuss with industry, we won't progress, any of us. And I think it's absolutely key for the future.
Thank you very much. And last?
Well, I think I fully agree with Professor. It's really important, this kind of collaboration and kind of, I would say, a kind of partnership agreement among the different actors. Industry, academia, university and research center are for us a really important partner in this process. And with students, and to understand the need of new generation means to have this flow of information continuously. This kind of cooperation that has to become, in some sense, co-design of new areas, of new area of activities, because it's really important that this kind of new ideas and new skills become directly permeates the new the innovation in the company. So that's why in this context, partnership with academia and research is really vital for big companies.
Thank you very much. So we all see there is a problem, there is a gap. Bridging this gap will require collective effort from industry, academia, from government institutions. Bridging the gap will be really vital for the future of our space industry. And the ones who are mindful of this and able to tackle the issue will build resilience for the future and will have competitive advantage in a fiercely competitive global world. So I would like to thank you all for your insights, to thank you for the participation and also the ones that have followed us online. This is a conversation that we will continue, and I hope that the topic of skills will also make it in the mainstream program of conferences like this one for the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, are we on? We need to start, guys. Quando sair, já no microfone. Sim. Eu vou fazer só uma breve introdução, uma coisa curta, passo-te a palavra, depois sais por ali, eu vou estar aqui naquela cadeira, dás-me o microfone a saída, está bem? I need to ask you microphone. Okay. Timing for you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session, the EU Space for Green Transformation, and the presentation of the study results of the European Commission and EUSPA. So today we have here Rodrigo da Costa from EUSPA, we have Fiametta also from EUSPA, we have Silvia, welcome, thank you very much, and Andrea from ISA. My name is Vera Pinto, and I will be your moderator for this session. So in December 2019, and just to give you a bit of context, I'm sure you already heard about it, the European Commission announced the European Green Deal, so a package of policies and initiatives to answer the United Nations 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. The EU Green Deal is designed to transform Europe into the first climate-neutral continent, achieving zero net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050. This is a very ambitious goal. Performing the green transformation, of course, requires that a company takes a deep look through their internal operations as well their surrounding supply chain to understand where and how pollution and waste can occur and how it can be reduced. Companies, of course, are setting transformation targets to reduce the greenhouse emissions and environmental footprint to their operations, as well promote their actions to attract customers and increase their market shares. Business benefit from a huge possibility of applications from EU space data, which translates into not only greener practices, but also cost reduction and increased efficiency. In the next half an hour, we will be talking precisely about this. We'll be highlighting you how space can be an enabler for the green transition. And with no further ado, I pass the word to Rodrigo da Costa, Executive Director of EUSPA, that will share with us a few thoughts.
Thank you very much, Vera, and thank you also to the participants of the panel. And first of all, I think it is quite clear that climate change is our challenge, is the challenge of humankind, and that the response of the European Union is the Green Deal. Now, it is with great pleasure that I'm here to announce today the launching of a very particular, very special report about EU space for green transformation. So how can EU space help in the green transformation? And in this particular case, a tool to help companies, to help businesses to monitor their sustainability targets. Now, indeed, the report aims exactly at that, at helping businesses in understanding the implications of the Green Deal, but also how EU space can enable them to comply with those targets. We all know, and I think it is widely understood, that space and EU space provide key elements, key tools in order to attain the Green Deal targets. And with this report, we are looking yet at another angle, and an angle that I hope we expect it will be extremely helpful for the businesses out there. So maybe a few details about the report, and I don't want to anticipate what the panelists will say afterwards. First of all, to tell you that it is indeed a very good baseline to understand to what extent the policies and the objectives stemming from the Green Deal are impacting companies, and then in a second step, to help companies indeed to tackle those challenges because it will provide an overview on how businesses can benefit on EU space data in many application domains, supporting the achievement not only of the green targets but also of the specific business targets. Now the report is broad, it covers a wide range of areas, and there are indeed specific examples in there because we want it to be a practical tool. The report is there not to be yet another book, but to be a practical handbook for companies. So we are looking at things like energy management, we are looking at things like mobility, we are looking at things like food system, forestry, etc. At a variety of areas from which companies can benefit from EU space in order to attain Green Deal targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodrigo, for your words. And without further ado, because you open a bit the appetite for the study, and maybe Fiammetta, you could give us, speak a bit more about the study and give us some concrete examples on the case studies that were used in this study.
Yes, thanks Vera. So first of all, I would like to say that it's not only to comply with policy that companies will go through green transformation, but it's also for their own future. So it is clear that to attract the talent, and we understood how difficult it is. It's one of the main outcome of this conference, the difficulty to attract talent in space. This is the same for all the other sectors. So our young generation will never go to work for a company that has not sustainability and green transformation in their main objective. And also to retain and to motivate the staff. So this is not only for external factors, so for a policy that as Europe we want to do, but is also for inner factor, the DNA of the company. And so this is the approach we use in the study. And we want to make it like a tool for companies from different sectors that want to go through green transformation and to concretely explain how they can use EU space in their daily life green transformation effort. So we do analyze the policy environment, so it's very concrete, so we tell the company what they have to comply to, but we also then go more in details how to use EU space. So we work with 30 companies. We have 1 year with us today, from SME to listed companies, from different sectors. So my director already quoted some, but the ESG, the environmental, social and governance, energy, mobility, forestry, tourism, and so this is not addressed to the space sector as such, but it is addressed to all the other sectors where they want to go through green transformation. 2 examples I wanted to make. The first one is about the ESG, the environmental and social governance. So here the companies, they have to define certain KPI they want to reach and to certify. This is also important for finance. So even if you are a startup or if you are a big corporation and you need to access finance, even the venture capitalists today, they will ask you the ESG to be able to finance you. And so here we explain how we can, with Copernicus, with Galileo, assess independently, so not biased data, to prove the ESG. A second example, forestry. So there is the new deforestation policy approach for which the value chain has to be certified not to have impact on deforestation. And this touch many sectors from that use actually the forestry for their business, from furniture to paper to all the products. And here we can use both Galileo to certify where it comes from, the raw materials that are used in forestry, and we can use Copernicus to monitor and to just explain and justify what happened there in independent ways. So just 2 examples. Finally, call for action. So all the companies outside the space sector that want to use space, they can come to USPA. We will help them to understand how and concretely to implement space and EU space to make their green transformation. So we are here today to give this important message to all the sectors.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiammetta. It's indeed very interesting, and all the potential and the connections that has with not the usual suspects, I would say, when we talk about the uptake of space data and services. We have here Silvia Pepino, Global Eye CEO. First of all, thank you very much for being here. It's always nice to have a CEO female in the panel. You were involved in this study, and you are using Copernicus and Earth observation to enable this transition. Can you please explain us a bit more how you contributed to this study and how you're helping others via Copernicus and Earth observation data?
Yes, hello. So first of all, thank you very much for having us here today to help you present this innovative study. Basically, GlobeEye develops Earth observation applications for sustainable finance. So basically, we are exactly in the area that Fiammetta mentioned. We develop ESG metrics from satellite data. And what we want to do is be this link between the space community and the sustainable finance community. We have mostly used Copernicus data to develop our environmentally and ESG insights, so we are clearly a very active user of Copernicus data for green purposes. In terms of exactly in this area that we contributed to the report, with some insights on ESG, but also with a case study on the monitoring of air pollution, so that we use also for ESG purposes. I think there are three things that come across, and something that I would like to highlight here is that there is a huge lack of data in the ESG world. This is recognized in all surveys, because basically data or poor data is really what is often highlighted as the highest barrier to higher investment in the ESG space. So satellite data really has a very powerful solution to this. It can give you data that's more accurate, more timely, and in many cases also cheaper than traditional solutions. There is also, well, yeah, we are in early days in this type of applications, I must say also, partly because the ESG world is still moving, so regulations are changing, definitions are changing, like for example for biodiversity, and also because Earth observation data is becoming better and better. And finally, I think it's also important to recognize that for this particular application, it is required to have very specific details, very specific levels of accuracy and coverage that also make it quite difficult to implement, and therefore we need a lot of machine learning, a lot of subject expertise to derive the good data and good insights, and so we come back to the needs for HR and talent. But overall, we see enormous possibilities of applications in this sector.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, some of the examples that you gave. I would like to to add another perspective to this idea of how space can help the green transformation. And with us, we have Andrea, the Chief Corporate Sustainability Officer. I hope I said it correctly, almost. But you are the man behind the sustainability office in ESA, so I'm pretty sure you saw a lot of examples during your professional life about how space and space R&D and what we are doing to our own sector can also be used to other sectors and to foster this green transformation and the achievement of the climate neutrality goals. Can you highlight this a bit more?
Yes, thank you, Vera. Good morning, everyone. For sure, many examples have been already given by my precedent colleagues. I would like to draw the attention to few sectors that are less usual suspect than others. Let's start with the construction sector. So satellite imagery and remote sensing are very much helpful for understanding how constructions and new buildings can have an impact on the environment. They are regularly used for that. But also satellite navigation and GNSS from Galileo information is very important to monitoring the movement of goods and things and optimizing and minimizing therefore the impact, the environmental impact of those movements in the building sector. There is another sector which is also very far from the usual suspect. It's not the energy management that we have been evocating before, but the energy production, the renewable energy production. So, and there are many satellites-based data that can help the production of renewable energies. Notably, if we look at the sentinels of Copernicus, though they provide very much information about the use of land and water, and they are very much important for the production of bioenergy or geothermal energy. If we look at the Cryosat satellite, that is an ESA satellite, this is measuring the thickness of ices in Antarctica and the height of the ice sheet in the Antarctica and in Greenland. But this is very important for wave and tidal energy production. And last but not least, we are talking about AirCare, which is another ESA satellite, which is supporting the production of solar and wind energy, because this is giving much information about cloud and aerosol in the atmosphere. So these are the less usual suspects that we can imagine. For sure, you have the transportation sector, which is very much also helped in its green transformation by space through global navigation satellites, so Galileo and EGNOS, ships, planes, but also cars that are optimizing their routes, therefore reducing the consumption of propellant and having less impact on the atmosphere.
Very interesting, thank you. I will open the floor for questions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise the hand so that I can give you the floor. In the meantime, I would kindly ask if we have questions also from the online audience. I see that no. So is there any other question from the audience? Yes, please. And I'm not sure if we have a microphone to this gentleman. Thank you.
Hello.
Oui.
Hi. Peter Gutierrez. I work for two magazines, Inside GNSS and Inside Unmanned Systems. So could I ask each of the speakers to just say a few words about unmanned systems, autonomous systems, and how that relates to the Green Deal?
Okay, thank you. Who would like to start first? Fiammetta, maybe?
Yes, so maybe I can start with this. So I think that one of the main area that we are working on for the Green Deal is mobility, sustainable mobility. And there I think that the unmanned and automated vehicles and way of transportation play an important role, because they will permit to optimize the emissions generated, choosing the best route, the best way. I'm thinking, for example, to the use of GNSS for autonomous vessels that will permit to open and optimize the route and combine with Earth observation to decrease the emissions, because we will know exactly all the conditions around, and so we could optimize and use it and use a precise navigation for the autonomous navigation. For the drones as well, we are exploring the use of Copernicus to optimize the route, especially in the future urban space that will be used for the drones. And also there, most of them will have automated functions. And last but not least, the autonomous cars. That is our next frontier, where we do also expect that this will contribute to lower impact and lower emission. So this is an area, the smart mobility and the sustainable mobility, of high interest for the study.
And that it fits also inside what is the EU sustainable mobility strategy that was published a few years ago, 2 years ago. I would like to ask Silvia or Andre if you would like to add something.
I think for our specific area, we are mostly using Earth observation data, but to the extent that we can increase the precision of the locations and can follow specific items very precisely, that kind of would clearly enrich any analysis that we can do from Earth observation and cross-analysis.
Andrea?
A quick one. For sure, this is very important, autonomous guidance and autonomous vehicles and what we have been doing so far. It's very important for increasing or reducing the impact on the environment. But the very first thing that we have to do is to avoid producing vehicles. So the efficiency should be increasing the way in which we share the existing vehicles or we reduce the production, because this is the very thing that is going to impact the environment. And it's a paradox, a very well-known paradox. The more you increase the efficiency and the more you use that increase of efficiency to do more in that sector. So my strong recommendation would be, because my role imposes it, I'm taking care of the reduction of the environmental footprint of the operations of the agency, of the organization. So reducing that would mean not producing the car.
If I may add something also, because I was in the sense of the smart mobility and at the same time of being more efficient and not producing more, is also the question of mobility as a service that U-Space program also helps. So it means that every one of us here today, when we are going outside and try to find our best way to travel in a city, U-Space data and services can help us to find the best way to do it by, of course, using what it's called mobility as a service. I would like to ask if there's more questions. I see that there's one from online. Can you please share the question?
Yes. So basically, they are asking, so talking about this green transformation, will this become compulsory for companies at some point? How can we make it really, how can we make it compulsory for companies, basically?
Yeah, so maybe I will start, Vera, if you want to complement also. So there are certain aspects that are becoming mandatory. So in the frame of the Green Deal, there are certain policies that require the company to comply. For example, the deforestation-free value chain that I was quoting before, no, it's not an option. Or the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that asks to report on the ESG. So there are certain things that are driven really by the policy. However, we see that many companies want to go beyond it. So it's not enough for them, for the reason we said. So to find the right investors or to find the right talents to be the company they really want to be. So they also pursue the green transformation beyond the obligation imposed by the legislation.
If I just may add something, being from the European Commission myself, the EU Green Deal is a package of policies that addresses every single aspect on the company's life, the citizens' lives. The idea is really to see how we can become a climate neutral continent. So this means, of course, that when the legislator takes action, usually change happens faster also. So this is the goal and the objective. And indeed, we are talking about the deforestation is the most recent example of regulation that was agreed, a political agreement last year, so it is approved. But there's other areas. For example, if you want to access finance, we are having the taxonomy regulation, for example, that address green financing. This means that companies will need to comply with certain targets if they want to have access to certain types of financing. So we can call it, there will be mandatory legislation, there will be soft law also, but there is a lot of things to do, and maybe our speakers can add a bit more on this.
Yes, I just wanted to say from the perspective also the private sector, where we see development globally. I mean, Europe is ahead, is a leading edge of all these regulations and policies in terms of greening the economy, greening the financial system. I think making the economy more sustainable and the whole of Europe more sustainable. So we are ahead in this. And so these regulations are coming. Some are there, some are on the way. And I think, again, this is again another opportunity with Copernicus as well to be in an area where we can kind of lead.
Thank you. Andrea, I know that ESA recently also made at the council, in the ministerial in last November, also a very important statement considering these aspects of working with all the industry and to promote sustainability. Maybe you could share one word or two about it?
Yeah, thank you, Vera. Exactly what I wanted to mention. The space sector is very much engaged and committed towards the decarbonization of its activities. And this has been done since a number of months. And last November 21st, the day before the starting of the Council at ministerial level, 23 organizations, private organizations, but also public organizations, space agencies, and national authorities have been signing a statement for a responsible space sector. So within this statement, there are a number of principles, values that are shared by the space sector actors, and among them there is the protection of the environment, so the protection of our atmosphere, which is the most precious thing that we have. And this is something that is generating additional concrete actions in the decarbonization of the space activities, for the moment in Europe, but I'm pretty sure that this is going to be enlarged.
Definitely Europe is leading on the climate neutrality efforts. I would ask if there's any other question from the audience.
So maybe, Vera, can I add one word about Europe here and
one
Europe
word,
space?
And then I would like still to have some time
I
for
would like
final
to,
question.
given that we are in space conference, I would like to remind that this is also a market. We have a 15 billion, the market of green transformation in 2022, to grow with the 22% rate in the next decade. So this is an opportunity where Europe is leading, so that's why the link to Europe. We saw recently in the news that there is some doubt about, for example, the CO2 compensation. When you buy the flight ticket and they ask you to compensate the CO2, then we don't exactly know how this is used. And so this is putting a lot of pressure on the sector. So with space data, we can demonstrate it. We can demonstrate that this is really happening, that is really happening in the place where it's declared. So this is also an invite for our innovation community in space and our startups to take this opportunity
Definitely.
And make Europe lead.
Definitely. And that is a very nice setting for closing our session. Sylvia, in 30 seconds, 1 minute more, what do you think is the next steps?
I think we are kind of in an intersection of secular trends of strong growth in sustainability, in sustainable trends, and also in the use of space data. So I think it's really taking advantage of this, and we'll have enormous opportunities.
Thank you. Andrea, the same question for you. 30 seconds. What is the next steps for you?
About opportunities, this is the moment for breakthrough innovation. And I think that space can be very much innovating in producing clean energy. And I want to recall the Solaris project that has been recently approved. The evaluation of this project has been recently approved by ministers of ESA, which is aiming at producing solar power in space and transferring it to the Earth. And you can imagine which paradigm shift is that introducing.
Absolutely. This is actually very inspiring. We can see that the climate neutrality is a vision, it's a goal, but it's also a question of survival of our life, but also a market of opportunities for the space sector to go out there and to drive change via innovation. So thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you very much for those attending this session here in person and online. And if you have more questions about how space data and services can help, please contact EUSPA and Fiamet Market Department, and they will be happy to help you drive the change. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And I hear you stepped in for a colleague.
Yeah, Violeta, she really wanted to come and make it, but I think she had some serious health issues. The doctor said, take it easy. All is fine, but don't rush.
But it's also, that's also, I think, travel was a misunderstood phase, right? It's also to screen, I mean, not to shift upside down and all the...
Exactly, that's what I told her.
May is the diversity. Yeah, so I think I'm going to put the innovation through diversity here as a video.
Okay, whole time.
It's an internal event.
Before, when the development, if there's such a clear sector that a service right now that is not a visit would be more much of a priority in the area of some others
We are just waiting because Isa is on live stream now. As you can see, they are interviewing the director general also. And then when we are done, we are going in. Oh, because there's something on the other side. And we are missing the person from the press that wants to tell me if there's questions in mind.
but it's also on panel, right?
This is going to be recorded, so you can use the videos to exit. Great. Okay, let's go. You can see.
Oh, wow. And it's a negative.
Good morning, everyone. We are live from the Youth Space Policy Conference, and now we are going to a very special session called Innovation Through Diversity. So, according to the World Economic Forum, companies with diverse management teams have 19% higher revenues due to innovation. Diverse teams are 70% more likely to capture and penetrate new markets. And recently, the GDFI Union of Equality survey that was launched during last year also showed a few numbers that deserve our attention, although they were not very surprising. But still, they deserve our attention. And I would like to share a few with you. 53% of employees agree that our sector is not welcoming or inclusive for everyone. 50.3 employees disclosed having been victims of discrimination at least once. And on the employer side, 76% indicated not handling any discrimination reports at all, while the remaining 24% claimed to receive several number of discrimination reports per year. So promoting inclusivity and diversity supports innovation and thus the competitiveness of the youth space sector. It is not just because we are doing the right thing. It is about ensuring the space sector is also competitive via its workforce diversity and leads to more innovation. My name is Vera Pinto. I work at the European Commission, the GDFI, and today we have two speakers with us that we will have a nice conversation about innovation through diversity. So on my right side, I have Aliki Volma, I hope I'm saying it correctly, from the European Commission Task Force for Equality. And on my left side, I have Cécile Emel, Director Regulatory Affairs from CES. So thank you very much for being here. And Aliki, I would start by you. And I would like to ask you, just to remind us, why diversity and inclusion is an important topic of discussion.
Great. Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Vera, for this introduction. I actually think you already mentioned briefly the two main reasons why diversity and inclusion is such an important topic of discussion. You hinted at both the business case and the justice case. and both are very important. So the business case is really all about why, especially in workplaces, inclusion and diversity relate to both innovation and growth. So inclusion and diversity, many studies show, as you already quoted, lead to more innovation, also higher well-being, which is also then related to higher motivation and staff satisfaction, that then leads to productivity. So I really think it's an endless positive loop, win-win. But the justice case is also very important, especially when we look at the societal level and the EU policy level. So that's really all about fairness and how important it is for different groups in society to have equal opportunities to contribute their talents.
Thank you. And this leads me to a question to CES. You are a company, you are a very known company worldwide, very well established. And so what does diversity and inclusion means for CES?
Well, thank you, Vera. And first of all, thank you. Thank you to the European Commission and to this conference for inviting us on this topic. Yes, indeed, we are a global player. I mean, we are located and headquartered in Europe, but we have become a global player already 20 years ago, and we are present in many, many different countries. It means that our workforce, made up of more than 2,000 people, comes from over 85 countries. So what I mean here is, in essence, as part of our DNA, I would say we are very diverse. Obviously, we need now to see what it means in practice, and I mean, there are more work to do on the inclusion aspects, and I would say also on the equity aspects. All of that is part of the same targets. So for us, it makes, let's be very blunt and clear about that, and I like your reference to the business and justice aspects, because that's exactly the way we look at it ourselves. First of all, it makes business sense, right? It brings commercial strength to our company, and a lot of studies have already demonstrated that. And the other aspects is ethically it makes sense as well. And you know, a lot of my colleagues are young, and for them it's kind of obvious that we need to go to another level of how we treat diversity and inclusion in our company. So all of that is important. Finally, it's something which we believe more and more in our company, so we really want to commit strongly on that.
Picking up on that, Cécile, how far is CES in their diversity and inclusion journey?
So we have done a lot of work internally, and I think that starts there, right? And let's be honest, we have started to do that during the COVID period. And it would be interesting to understand why we did that during that period. But it means that 3 years ago, we have started to accelerate and strengthen the way we look at diversity and inclusion. So a lot of internal communication and also alignment amongst our various departments and various offices across the world on these issues. It's very clear that it starts there, because if the awareness level is not sufficiently high, people will simply not understand or be conscious of what's going on. And there is a lot to do, clearly. So this was our starting point. The other aspect is we wanted to establish specific targets, right, and accountability. So we have developed tools based on existing tools which were shared notably by the Luxembourg government. So what happened is we have done, you know, we have launched ourselves into a program of setting exactly where we want to go, how far we do things, and I think we also recognize that this is a continuous process. It cannot be overnight. It's going to embark us into a long journey, but we need to make it.
This is very interesting, and I would like to pick up from here, from this smaller, and I'm not mean in the bad sense, but smaller from a company side, and go to a macro level at European level, because it is also true, you started a journey during COVID, and in fact our current commission started just before the COVID times. And it is one of the priorities from the Commission van der Leyen, the Union of Equality, so to promote and to work more on the legislative aspects and soft laws. So I would ask Aliki if you could give us this macro vision of what is happening in these last years and what is coming to the future.
Yes, so the Union of Equality really is a big innovation in the field of both EU policy and equality policy in the past few years. And maybe just to explain briefly what that means, the Union of Equality really is a large horizontal policy goal, but there's also infrastructure behind it in the EU institutions. So we have the first ever EU Commissioner for Equality, Helena Dalli, and she is supported by a horizontal task force of equality coordinators, Vera being one of them, in every single DG Directorate General of the European Commission. And our aim as a task force is to mainstream equality considerations. So that's both in relation to gender, but also in relation to, for instance, disability, AIDS, racial or ethnic origin, and sexual orientation into all EU policy areas, including, of course, space policy. And this is a huge step forward in making sure that we're not just doing targeted policies for equality, which are very important and which perhaps I'll mention a couple of either now or later, but also thinking about how this vision of equality applies in all policy areas. And it's really so important because whenever we design policies at the EU level that are supposed to benefit the whole EU and all people, they will only really reach everyone if we think how do different groups need to be specifically targeted.
I would like to actually, if you could develop a bit more, because indeed we are talking about action from the legislator, and I was just saying this in a previous session, that when the legislator takes action, change occurs faster. So instead of taking 3 generations, change can take in 1 generation. And I know, because I'm the equality coordinator in the GDFI, that we are having a lot of horizontal legislation that applies to all sectors. So that means that it will also be applicable to our own sector, and that our companies and industries will also need to adapt. And so I would like for you to share a few examples of this horizontal legislation, of EU legislation that companies will need to implement soon.
I have 2 excellent, very recent examples of new legislation at the EU level that are very relevant to workplaces. The first is the recently adopted directive on gender balance on company boards. So this is really a milestone achievement at the EU level because it took 10 years to negotiate, but it was adopted in November 2022. And this is really about having gender balance in the boards of EU-listed companies. And the aim is to have either 40% at the non-executive director level or 33% when looking at all directors. And this is really about how companies should be reflecting EU society. And it's also closely related to democracy, of course, in terms of the participation of both men and women in leadership. And the other example is about equal pay. Equal pay between men and women is one of the core EU values, and we've had legislation for years already on this, but it's still there. We still have a gender pay gap in the EU, varying between different countries. And one big step forward was that we also reached a political agreement, a little pre-Christmas present in late December, on the directive on pay transparency. So this really, once formalized into EU law, will help staff members to fight pay discrimination, have more information about pay levels, and for companies to move forward in closing any gender pay gap that there may be.
Thank you, Aliki, for those examples. And this brings me to SES. So let's go again to a more concrete company environment. And can you share with us some specific examples and initiatives that SES had implemented in your company that might or not come from legislation that is in place already. So could you share a few examples of concrete actions that SES is putting in place?
Yes, Vera, we can actually talk about what we've done for the last 2-3 years, noting that, you know, diversity and inclusion are part of our ESG strategy. So we're getting very serious on this strategy because it's about space sustainability, it's about environmental goals, it's about critical human needs for connectivity. So this one is amongst the 4 pillars of our strategy. The first thing we did was to amongst the internal initiatives was to sign the Charter of Luxembourg, the Diversity Charter, in October 2020. And very interestingly, and I think we can already say that we used the track record we had already. About a year later, we were actually awarded in Luxembourg by IMS, which is part of CSR Europe, for, well, already a good level of according to the targets of diversity and inclusion. But I think we have to realize that this is, of course, we're proud of that, but it's clearly an indication that we have a responsibility, a role in the sector. And that is a point I want to make very clear. Everything we do internally is obviously essential because we want to develop a culture that goes towards more ambitious targets, but we also want, as a leader of the industry sector, to promote the way we do things, and we would love participating to the creation of norms on that regard. So together with, for instance, our suppliers and distributors, customers, we promote now this kind of values. So we do that in our relationship. Let's take one concrete example because you asked about something very concrete now. And let's be clear, money talks. So what we have now implemented in our company is that our management, the senior legal team, their revenues, their remuneration embarks now a diversity and inclusion goal. And it's significant as part of their remuneration. Of course, this is one step. The other step is to enlarge that analysis about the remuneration gap, the gender gap. This is something which we're working very hard on, and we know that this is kind of obvious. It's a very visible element of what's going on. We are now using a Luxembourg government tool in order to analyze and monitor where we are with this gap. But this is one aspect, the most visible. At the same time, this is also very much in terms of culture. So everything which is about recruitment, retention of people, development of people internally, we need absolutely to elevate how we promote female leadership, to make things very clear, and how also we are not ashamed about any inclusive aspects. It's not only a gender issue, it's also about whatever skills and abilities people have. One thing which my colleagues shared with me recently, and I think that's quite eloquent, is we should not impose our expectations and standards when we recruit people or when we develop them internally. We should first look at their strengths and their possibilities, and from there see how we can elevate them internally and use their abilities and strengths for us. So this is very concretely how we want to change the paradigm and the way we look at people and our workforce.
This is actually very interesting, considering that early today we were having a session here about skills and how much and how desperate we are, the sector, to have to attract the right people. So maybe we are just not looking through the right lens, and we need to change them. So it's a very interesting point. But considering all this journey that you did, so you signed the diversity charter, you even had a prize, and I'm very happy to hear that you say that we are doing a good job, but there's more still to be done. For those who are starting this journey, or they are already in the beginning of this journey, what do you think is the pitfalls that they should be aware of?
I think, as I said at the beginning, the first thing is to make absolutely, the first priority is to ensure information and communication internally. That is absolutely essential, that we embark everyone in that journey, and that is not left to a small department somewhere in the company. Otherwise, something is completely wrong. That is first to be inclusive of everyone in the company, right? Second aspect is, and that's one thing I haven't mentioned so far, data and information that is available on what is the reality of a company, and more generally, all the misunderstanding which this could lead to. There is a lot of bias in how we communicate, we do trainings, we have exchanges with the external world, simply looking at how we write things. There are many bias in how we communicate and in terms of gender equality, but also the way we talk about the strengths of our workforce. So we need clearly to embark into a training program, and this is what we do more and more now. Internally, we embark everyone in that awareness exercise of, yes, it's not only about having nice to have objectives, but it's really a mindset. It's a complete culture that needs to change. Another aspect which is important, obviously, is there are some aspects which are budgetary. But to be honest, the budgetary aspect is about the remuneration gap. It's not really about anything else, because it's more about dedicating resources, accepting that this is important in the company, more than just, there's no real expenses internally. It's more motivating people and making them realize that it is essential. It's not just a nice to have. It's really something that makes sense. It's commercially interesting and ethically a good thing. So the budget element is, at the end, maybe not that much of an issue.
Especially that if you are more diverse, you have more revenue. If you have more revenue, your budget also increases. So in the end, is a sum null for the costs that you will have by actually investing in these aspects. I would just like to add something on what on both you said, because you talked about the gender pay gap, and usually it's something that we don't think about it. Is that is related to life expectancy and the gender pay gap. Is that what happens is that usually women tend to be to live longer. I'm sorry, Cecile.
That's all right.
We tend to live longer, and that means also that there's also what it's called the gender pension gap, gender pay pension gap. That means that because of the roles that traditional women take, so usually they take more leaves of absence, non-paid leaves, plus the gender pay gap. That means that when they get old and retire, that they are also at higher risk of poverty, and they will still need to live much longer than men. So it's really a question of thinking also ahead on the future for our current, young people and our current generation also, because I'm getting old now, so I cannot include myself on the young category anymore. But if you speak at the generations to come, this is also ensuring their future. I would like to ask a question because to Aliki. Cecile, you mentioned the diversity charter that you signed, and Aliki, this is part of an EU initiative also that started 10 years ago. The national diversity charters that are part of the EU platform of diversity charters. So can you talk a bit more about this?
Yeah, this is one of the key non-legislative actions of the Commission to encourage companies and also public institutions to think about and move forward on diversity and inclusion in workplaces specifically. So indeed, it was in 2010 that we initiated the EU platform for diversity charters. There are now 26 national diversity charters across the EU. And we believe more than around 14,000, we think, of signatories of individual companies and public institutions. So basically, a diversity charter is usually a relatively short document that makes a clear statement about what that workplace is doing to progress on diversity and inclusion. So it's really about setting the goals and also about accountability and about getting support and learning from each other. So the EU platform is also very much an opportunity for mutual exchange. That's really how we need to look at it, because workplaces, all together we make a society, the platform has shown to be very supportive for different institutions.
This is actually very interesting because sometimes one of the, from my experience working with SMEs and startups that don't have as much resources as big as CES or as big companies, and we are talking a lot about entrepreneurship also in space sector, sometimes they don't know where to start, right? So that means that the diversity charter can actually be a good starting point to get the support and the know-how, learn from the good role models that already exist in the sector, and then move forward. That's actually quite amazing. We have 2 questions from the online audience. So we would take the time also to reply to the questions. We are just trying to get the mic. So
Perfect.
Please.
Yes, I have 2 questions from online. The first one is for you, Vera. The statistics of the survey that you mentioned at the very beginning, did you expect such results? And if you could develop a little bit on that. The second question is, but I think you've partially answered already, what would be the next really concrete action to be taken by the ecosystem and companies to ensure more inclusion, diversity in the space sector?
That is actually a good question. I would keep it to the end so that we can close with a nice vision and tips for the people that are following us. Picking up on the previous question on the survey, so like I said, the results were not very surprising. Even here, if you are in this conference, you look around and you can see that space sector is not exactly very diverse. And for those who, like me, that are for 20 years coming to space events, you see a positive trend. So I see more women, for example, attending the conferences. I still remember when I was the only one. And so that is good. But you can still see by experience that there's still a lot to do. So if you are a bit more aware and look around you, you will see this. Of course, I was very concerned with the fact that 76% of the companies that reply to the survey do not handle discrimination complaints that they receive. In case you don't know, there's the legal obligation actually to deal with them and to have a system. And again, the Diversity Charters platform could be a good start to set up that system internally and to learn how to do it. And also to avoid maybe some legal cases at national level, not doing it. The results are published on the GDFI website, so if you go there, you can see the full report. The study included also some more inside, more desk research information, some bilateral interviews also with other stakeholders. So it's not just the survey itself. So we did the survey, but we also did other research to validate also a bit the results and see if we would really getting the right trend. And you will see all the study there. And now because we need to be mindful about our time, the second question, let's use it to end this session. So Margot, can you just once again say the questions for us to...
The second question, what is the next really concrete action to be taken by the ecosystem and also private sectors to ensure more inclusion and diversity in the space sector?
Super, thank you so much. So Aliki, what?
The very concrete example would be, I think, considering signing a diversity charter if you are a workplace. But slightly more broadly, I would encourage everyone, whether individuals or workplaces, to have a look at all of the EU equality strategies. There's one on gender equality, one on LGBTIQ equality, one on race equality, one on disability rights, and also one on Roma inclusion, for instance. And to look at how that applies to you in your private life and in your work life, and encourage people to take leadership in both. So in their personal lives, for example, questioning biases, speaking out when they see discrimination, and also in their workplaces, helping the culture move forward.
Thank you. Cecile, based on your experience, based on CES experience, what message can you pass?
Well, first of all, as a man, I hope I will live long enough to see all these changes in the STEM sector, because indeed, the STEM sector is clearly an illustration of a gap. And as we said before, you need to look at people differently. And the strengths can be somewhere you had never suspected before. So this is all about that, different lens. I think one element that is critical in all of this is we need patience. We need some time. We need to recognize that you are not going to change that paradigm overnight. What matters is to identify all the steps, the concrete steps you need to go through in order to progress. And our little experience is that first you need to have the buy-in from the top management of your company. This is really, that needs to start there as a company. If that doesn't find its source from the top management, you're going nowhere. So this is really the first element. Second is to indeed concretely analyze what you want to do through which steps. And then, you know, you need the buy-in. You need to progress. You need to embark everyone. You need to raise the awareness in the company. And I think accept that it will be a long journey, but there will be concrete things that you can go through. So the milestones can be identified, I'm sure.
I think this is actually very, very nice messages. And while I was hearing, I remembered one quote that I would end our session with that. And for you to keep, you that are following the session, to keep this in mind, that it says one person can change the world and everyone should try it. So it's up to us as individuals, as professionals, and our private life and our professional life to step by step start building the change. So thank you very much for being here with us today, and I hope that we will keep this discussion up and running. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.